Welcome back to another episode of Day One Radio. I am Brandon LSK. As you can see, my brother Maurice Garland is not here with me, but we're going to keep it rocking. By the time y'all hear this episode, it'll be one of y'all holidays, Thanksgiving, as y'all call it. But we're going to give you a little gift on that day, man. You can listen to before you get out and enjoy it with your family. So it's really dope, man. You were one of the people that I've always wanted to talk to. If you're watching, you can already see who it is. If you're listening on your favorite podcast app, we are in here with Immortal Technique. What's good, brother?
How you doing, man? Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, man, thank you for coming, especially in the middle of a tour and all of that. I definitely appreciate the love. Funny story, man. I discovered your music for the first time, I believe, in 2003.
Oh, wow.
2003 or 2004, I was working with this company, and we were doing some work at Willowbrook Middle School in Compton. And it was a teacher who was playing Revolutionary Volume 2 in the classroom.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, yo, who is that? I'd never heard this before. I don't even remember what song it was. And he was like, oh, man, it's this cat named Immortal Technique, man. You got to check him out. I was like, yeah, I will. And mind you, this is 2003, so that ain't just go on your phone and you know what I mean?
You had to go
real quick. So he actually gave me his CD, and I still have that CD to this day.
Yo, whoever that teacher is, God bless you.
Yeah, shout out to him, man. Shout out to him. That was real big. But yeah, that was crazy, and it just shows you how much your music means to people. And you're not one of these artists that drops 8 projects every year, but when you do drop, it means something to a lot of people.
Quality over quantity.
Yeah.
And I also think that over the years, I built up a very, very powerful fan base because unlike other artists who cried about losing a few dollars here and there from downloading, I encourage downloading. And I would always tell people, hey, burn it for the next person that you think would love music like this. And if they want to support, here's the website. Here's how you can get in contact with us, viperrecords.com. And I think over the years, that kind of graciousness, instead of being like angry and upset at the changing tide of media and just of music in general, gave me a wherewithal to understand kind of where the mentality of the culture was. So here would be, someone like Metallica looking like a spoiled rich guy, like, how dare you download my music? Like, first of all, these labels have been raping you for years.
Oh, absolutely.
And you're mad at a couple of kids, And I remember I went to, I think it was something called like the Latin Rap Conference, and I never forget, this is why I don't get invited to these kind of things no more. There was a group of people, and they were executives, and they were honored to ask kids questions about what they felt was right about music and like where the trends were. And they spent half the time like criticizing the kids, like, well, why would you download something? Like, if you walk in a store, wouldn't it be the same thing as a store? And I just had it. I exploded, and I was like, first of all, if you had $250,000 for a budget, and then you decided that $150 belonged to you for just being the person that discovered someone, and then you gave $100,000 person, a little bit back to that person, $100,000 back to them, isn't that embezzlement? What did you really do for that money? You asking these 14 and 15-year-old kids, why do they steal? Why do you steal? Why does this whole thing set up like an unfair gangster operation? And I said, I won't even let you answer the question because I wasn't taught the business by people from the hood. I was taught the culture by people from the hood. I learned the business by the people that hired you, the Italian and the Jewish people who told me from the very beginning, of course it's set up like a gangster operation because before America became a democracy in 1967, and you just had people that were out here without the right to vote, and America was still disgustingly, before it was great again, quote unquote, when it was still in that miserable state. What's interesting is that people don't realize that black and brown people just couldn't go to court and just petition randomly for their stuff. In 1944, 48, so what used to happen is they have to have some gangsters, you know what I mean? Yeah. Especially some white gangsters. Luigi, Giuseppe, or Ari and Aaron will come to your house and saw your hands off and be like, nah, man, you gonna get Louis Armstrong all of his publishing. Or, oh, I'm sorry, you're gonna play this 12 years a slave metaphor and pay him up front for one half of the records on one half of everything, but then there's no back end. No, we're gonna saw your fingers off until we get a back end. And all of a sudden, here we go, oh, now we made a split point. Yeah. Stop playing with me. Don't make me take another one of your fingers. And that's why it was always set up that way. Because if you are the big homie on the block, it's not long before you get used to taxing everybody who's hustling there. And then you start feeling like you get to tax people for the rest of their lives. Yeah. And when you look at the idea of ownership and all these other things, it really made me think like, oh man, I'm doing this for a bigger purpose. The culture is changing, the culture is shifting. I want this information to get out more than I care about making a couple of bucks here and there. Like I'm gonna be successful regardless. People are gonna hire me to do shows. People are always gonna buy the records because they love and support it. So I didn't make as much of a moot point on things like it would be like a moron arguing about the artistic value of graffiti. Like, all right, bro. We understand that it's slightly wrong to put on people's things, but it's also slightly wrong to gentrify an entire neighborhood and build these buildings here and throw people out.
That's coming from somebody who grew up in Harlem, so you really know that. I'm from Oakland, so I know it as well, for sure. I want to rewind just a little bit, and if y'all are not familiar and you're just getting the education, this is one of the most intelligent brothers in music, period. So you're going to learn some shit. You might have to look up a couple things, but trust me, at some point. You mentioned the 1967 thing, so one of the questions I have for you is, what are your thoughts on this Comcast suit that went from the 9th District Court that's in the Supreme Court now with Byron Allen and his situation going against Comcast, and Comcast is trying to kind of reverse that ruling to an extent?
Right. I think Mr. Allen is an interesting figure because a lot of people are looking at him now in a way that they didn't before. Absolutely. They see him as a symbol wherein he has, and no disrespect to the brother because I don't know him personally, but there's this kind of OJ aura around him.
Oh, people definitely looked at, right. I mean, Uncle Tom was not an Uncle Tom if you read the book, but people looked at him as Uncle Tom back in the day. He was
they saw him as a person who wasn't personally involved in the community, and now all of a sudden is drawing from that organic strength of people that are upset at him or upset for him, either one. I think that the case is going to have merit regardless of what a person's emotional reaction to it is. But I always say that there's a larger lesson for everybody else involved. And I think the larger lesson here is when you create something, at what point do you sell it? Or do you keep it forever? And that's a very, very underlying. Like, brother, how about this? They come to you, they say, hey, man, your man done a great job. This brother done a great job. But we'd like to buy you out, right? And the difference is the corporations don't come to you with no bullshit. Yo, here's a zip and $2,000. No. They come to you very professional. Ladies and gentlemen, hey, brother. They might even send a black dude. Hey, brother, the company I represent. That'll be the first person they say. The company that I represent, right? But what they're really saying is the Corleone family would like to buy you out. Yeah. Right? And you could ask George Lucas or anybody who created something and then sold it to, as he put, white slavers. That's what George Lucas said this. Yeah. When you create something, at what point do you take it and say, well, am I going to give this up and get a giant payload? Or am I going to try and take this idea to such a level that I become part of the institution that can't be bought out? When I become one of those people that buys other people out in that sense. And I think that's one of the hardest things to deal with in recognition today. I think the reason that a lot of us take the money is because we're afraid of those scenarios in which we haven't taken the money and people have said, well, I'm gonna do this anyway, or I'm gonna copy exactly what this person did and then be able to do, all these other things with it. And especially in the Black and Latino community, I feel like there's a big pressure to get, quote unquote, get money. because money seems to be the end all, where all agreement. For example, one person has riches and another person doesn't, and they're in an argument, and the argument has nothing to do with financial success, but the person and the kids are so naive nowadays that they'll look in the camera and say, well, yeah, he must be right, or whatever he did must be right because it led him to a place where he had more money. Now, I tell the kids very plainly, I became a millionaire when I was 26 years old. Does that mean that I've been right about everything since I was 26 years old? No.
Right.
But I was right about understanding my ownership to the music. Like, for example, the people, like I told you, who schooled me to the game in the streets were people that were from the culture of music, the black and brown people who invented that in the Bronx and in Harlem. And when I went back and I relearned the business from people who actually ran the business, and I told them, hey, I have a company that wants to pay me $425,000 for half the publishing, they laughed. And they would say, what are you, crazy? He said, you know, they're gonna put your stuff in college textbooks someday, and it'll be 50 years from now, and you'll still own the masters and the sync license, and they'll have to pay you, you know? And he said, just imagine if the people that taught you how to rap had decided to, I don't know, trademark the word hip hop. They'd be sitting on billions of dollars right now, and then they would be able to decide whether they wanted to invest that back into the community. And there's a difference, because I think the community, people think of a street or a project. No, we don't mean that. We mean creating generational wealth within the people to say, okay, you know what? All of us are gonna be involved in some kind of industry, you know, to make a power move. There's one thing that communists and capitalists agree on. We have a big right-left divide. I think that for the first time, we're seeing more of that in the black and Latino community. But one thing that communists and capitalists agree on is that a person that makes $30,000 and a person that makes $300,000, they're both working class people. It's just that the media has fooled you into thinking that the person that makes $300,000 is upper middle class and the other person is working class. No, they're both working class because neither one of them controls the means of production, right? The class is not determined by people that have money. Like, I know people who got a nice house, a nice car, like the screen behind you, 2 kids, they sending them to private school, but they're worth negative $600,000. Right. So you're a wage slave, technically. Yeah. So the premise of what I do is based on me owning the means of my production, owning the masters, owning my studio, owning access to all the equipment that I have, similar to the way you have here. And now you've built up a brand. So Byron Allen's case and all that, to me, there's a greater conundrum in there. What would it take for you to sell out, right? What does it take? Because in other countries, when people say, oh, they go to Africa and they offer them millions of dollars and it seems like those people are just corrupt. No, it's not that they're corrupt. I think there's a big difference in how people do business. And I think it was best exemplified, brother, because someone told me that a petty criminal steals from you, right? Go in your pocket, or he'll short you some money you sent him out for food for, or some nonsense. But a real gangster makes you take his money, right? Damn. No, my nigga, you will sell me your fucking company, or I'm gonna hire him behind your back and him, the people that knew how to do this. Or, matter of fact, I don't need the 2 of you. I just need one of you to flip for $50 million. Which one's it gonna be? Who wants to live in a big mansion? Now, give me the blueprint to what this brother did to make it work. I know it won't be perfect, but here's the point. It doesn't have to be. It can just be a similar thing and the main basis, and as soon as they hit to that tiny combination and they hear it click, they'll say, we have enough to be able to duplicate it. And that's exactly what they do.
It's ironic you say that. I remember I was in college, and one of my instructors was cool with Chuck D when Chuck was in Atlanta, and he was talking about they were the only 2 people in the state that had the Avid editing software back in the day. And Chuck was doing this DVD thing, and he was saying that Chuck was like, yeah, and what happens is you start impeding on their money, and there's choices. You work with them, you work against them, and they put you out of business, or you take their payout. And I didn't fully understand that at the time. I'm 19, 20 years old. But yeah, I mean, that's essentially what we're looking at. And it looks like Byron Allen is trying to be that power player to come in and do the same thing later on?
I think it's one thing to look back on that, like you said, and say, man, we have these limited amount of choices where we can get the payout. But then we also have to recognize that, and this only comes because I've been working on the album for years, The Middle Passage.
Right.
I did a lot of research on The Middle Passage, and one interesting thing that I came up with within the course of that was that during the beginning of the process of slavery, in which I remind people was legalized rape and pedophilia.
Absolutely.
Is that they destroyed over 10,000 individual African instruments. Damn. And I don't think that can be said loudly enough for it to bear the significance of what it actually means. And as a matter of fact, I think that years from now, people will point back to this tiny particular part of this interview and say, wow, I can't believe that I was so high or so drunk or so distracted in my fucking day that I didn't hear these two brothers on this show talking about something that impacted not just my life, but my grandfather's life, my great-grandfather's life, my father's life, every single person going back to slavery and every other child that will have to come into my generation until we find some means of equality beyond this. Because none of us learned the alphabet through a numerical scale. We all learned it through a musical scale. Yep. Everything that we have is a musical scale. So Europeans destroyed an African sense of teaching. In other words, they burned every school. They didn't have to do it physically. They did it spiritually by destroying those instruments. Physically, yeah, they destroyed 10,000s or thousands and thousands of instruments. But what they technically did is rob people of probably, I want to say, 10 to 20,000 years of just the legacy of invention. And when you ask yourself about hip hop, is it something that's totally organic that we've invented now, which is partially true? Or is it also that we're reaching back as people to a time in which those melodies and those harmonies and those words and those conversations were had? You know, in Africa and in a lot of indigenous societies, death isn't seen as a moneymaker where they charge you $8,000 for this casket or they tell you what kind of floral arrangement you want or no, they celebrate that because they celebrate their people going home to meet their ancestors. Oh, I'm not sad mom's dead. I'm glad that mom's with grandma and grandpa. And now they all can give me advice in my dreams. Right. And now I can carry on to a farther degree. But I'll do you one better. And it touches exactly on what we were just talking about. What did European music sound like in the 1300s and the 1400s? Certainly not what it sounded like in the 1500s and the 1600s. Right. You obviously didn't burn the blueprint to those horns and those strings. You just took them and you came up with something that you thought would fit your ear better. Hence the birth of modern classical music. There you go. Yeah. So that's ours too.
No doubt. So you mentioned The Middle Passage. You've been talking about this album for a while. I'm sure your fans are like, okay, you're on the Middle Passage tour, so we're gonna get this album soon.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. We're looking at first quarter, and we're also playing songs from The Middle Passage on the tour. So we do at least, I want to say, 7 or 8 songs. Some of them are, about half of them are full songs. So about I would say 4 full songs and then 4 like half songs or snippets or something like that. Tonight we're gonna get through a couple of full songs, and we'll have an extra one to get to because David Banner and Killer Mike are both going to be there. Nice. And these are people who, man, have been extremely helpful to me. I mean, even here, even when you say you used to live down here in Atlanta, yeah, I live with Killer Mike in his spare room. Like, with him and Shay, they had the spare room, and they were like, yeah, go on, put him in there. And I was like, hey, man, I'll be in there, no problem, man.
You know what's crazy? I think that was the first time we actually met. Was during that time because Mike is my guy. Like me and Mike have been friends for years.
When we lived in Silver Springs, I'd be up there. He's not there no more, so I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm not giving you his address. You can go there and knock on his door like a crack.
Sandy Springs. Yeah. So that's crazy. You just jogged. I think when you get to this age, it's so many memories. There's so much cool shit that's happened. Like it takes things like that to remember. So what has the reaction been to the songs thus far on the
Man,
road?
amazing. I mean, the song I did with Mike and Banner is called Trap House, and it's really about how America's a trap house. It's how we live in a narco state, and that the government has been paying its bills for years with drug money and then incarcerating people, specifically poor people, for doing the same thing.
Absolutely.
And I think that one giant factor that is lost upon all people is that, or not all people, but is now, I would say, coming to light in a way that it wasn't, is that drug addiction, brother, for years was seen as a moral failing, right? These people are morally fucked up. What they're doing is wrong.
Now we got the opioid crisis all of a sudden.
Right. And it was treated like a criminal justice issue. And now that someone else's demographic is being affected in another way. Like, for example, I've never heard the word birth rates in reference to people. But now that they realize, oh, wow, I want to start banning abortion, not because I really care about people or because I'm a religious fanatic, but because I would like my demographic to outnumber the other demographic of people. Because as many abortions as black and brown people get, we still don't get nary now many as white people do. So
I mean, and it's that, and it's also like we see that we're not there, see that they're not going to be the majority numbers wise in this country very soon.
And they never were. They built a settler colony on an indigenous continent.
True.
And they were predated for people that came to this side of the world by several other groups of people.
Absolutely.
And I think one interesting part that is never discussed also, or not discussed enough, but where I'm more than willing to do this on your show, is look, Ellis Island, that place that white people love to cheer for, wasn't opened until 1892. So if you came here between 1892 and now, yeah, you an immigrant. But since we're down south, let's tackle a liberal fallacy. We're not a nation of immigrants because the people that came between 1492 and 1892, you didn't come here to sweep the floors of teepees like immigrants be coming here to sweep the floors of your stores. You didn't come here to clean up like the way they be maids in the hotels cleaning up campsites. No, you came here because it was legal to rape a little boy. And you couldn't get away with that over there. And that's why your laws give a slap on the wrist to predators and child molesters, and people care so little about black and brown children, especially little black girls now being sexually trafficked. And
Exactly.
that's not part of your agenda because it never was. You saw a prison system as a money-making machine. But you've always had a soft heart for people who did sick crimes like that because that's the reason that Europeans came to this side of the world. They were attracted here because they thought, oh, in West Africa, they have laws. It's not that they didn't have laws. It's just we don't have to respect those laws, right? And there's an interesting quote by Julius Caesar when he goes to Egypt and he goes, you owe us this amount of money or we're going to come collect. And they said, according to Roman law, we owe this amount of money. And he said, is there any other kind? And that's how white Americans see the rest of the world, and Europeans have seen the rest of the world. Is it illegal in Spain to do this to a baby? Probably. But is it illegal for me to do this in Africa? I guess no one's there to check me, so I'm going to go find out. You didn't come here to assimilate to any society, even though there was a society here. You came here because you wanted gold, you wanted women, and now you're not proud of that in the same way you were 100 years ago. That's not something you can brag about. You know, I raped that family, and now they have my blood in their descendants. That's a shame. Like if we found out that the players that were part of some football team were all in some way, shape, or form related to the owner because he raped some of their descendants, this would be a different game we were watching.
Absolutely.
Right? And they used to be proud of stuff like that. Like, oh, those people belong to me. And therefore, the leasing laws that we see in terms of society, we say, oh, man, why are they so predatory? I'm sure here in Atlanta, just like in New York City, there's no difference. Why are these leasing laws so fucked up? Because leasing laws started with slavery. Again, research from the Middle Passage. I that whole like phony lie, white people, not all white people own slaves. You're right. It took a lot of money to own a slave, but a lot of people had them because they were the most popular thing to lease out at the time. And not only the lease, but I lease you this person and you pay off the rent of what it would be, in the same way that I know every 2-bit hustler out there who's watching this and say, oh man, I'm gonna buy that apartment and let that tenant pay the rent. Where'd you get that idea from? Another black person? And certainly not. You got that from a white slave master who passed it on to another white person, who passed it on to another white person, who passed it on to the black person that taught it to you. Don't play games with me, man. You got to go to deep water to meet me. And I'm telling you right then that they would lease the person out and let the quote-unquote tenant pay the rent, the person who was leasing the slave out from a very young age. And any children that the slave had belonged to not the leasee, right? Excuse me, it's not the leaser, but the leasee. So I'm the one who continues to make the money. It comes back to me, but compounded interest, the birth of that concept for you, all you people watching the news. And this is wherein we get the modern world, like the righteous world that we built on. And I think in that sense, it also forces black and brown people to confront one more thing, that the greatest mind trick has been played on them. That African people, because I was born in Harlem and I learned from the great John Henrik Clarke, who people love to quote, but actually haven't read his stuff in totality, which is an embarrassment. He loves to remind people, and I always tell people that when we look at black culture, we're not looking at like just black culture. We're talking about human history. Yeah. Black culture, black history, that's human history. So the first people to domesticate animals, to work with woodworking, to have metallurgy, to bury people for the purposes of a religious idea because they conceptualized God. So just a few. Right. But the problem is that unless you put those things into the proper context and say, well, if all of this is part of a greater message or a greater theme that we've all realized and recognized over the course of thousands and thousands of years, then at what point did everything that we invented get co-opted by somebody else and sold back to us in the same way that we brought up with the first question? That it comes in.
Absolutely. This is the last question. I know you got to get the sound check and all of that. I want to leave the listeners with some game. So you've done a lot of research for this album. Very read, very learned brother. If you could give 3 books or resources that people most definitely need to check out that will help them during these times, give them some game during these times, which books or resources would they be?
American Negro Slave Revolts by Herbert Aptheker is always a classic for those that haven't read it. I'm trying to think. You know what? It's an oldie but a goodie. I would say the Bible, because all the main characters are black. Okay. Hey, we're down here in Atlanta. You want me to put your people on the game. I'm not saying you have to read it selectively the way that the people who co-opted your religion then decided to do so. But it's always good to remember that every single person, the only white people who exist in that story are Romans and Christians, and Romans and Greeks. And Yeshua ben Yosef was neither a Greek nor a Roman. Right. I think another one that's interesting is Sapiens, because then you're looking at a kind of scientific historical study of human beings. So you're talking about the first Homo sapien appearing in our records in Africa about 215,000 years ago. So previous to that, we were outdated on this planet by another species called Neanderthals. And they've really been given a bum rap because they're seen as these kind of mindless cavemen, when in reality, they're the ones that invented music. See, the genius of the African was to take a drum that the Neanderthal used to have as stable, or animal skin over a dead stump that he could bang on that was hollowed out. But the genius of the African was to say, well, imagine that world in which we didn't exist with anything else, where there was no music, no nothing, just the river and the wind. And we saw these human-like people that had a slight more hairy appearance, slightly slower, and they were chanting and singing. They were the only other hominids with a speech gene. So I think looking at it from a scientific perspective kind of balances out the religious zealotry. That's also a series of adopted African stories that are then compiled and then retold. Because if we want to talk about people co-opting something, You know, there's no better place to look than the Bible to see a religion that's co-opted. You know, when people say that's a white man's religion, I say, well, it's originally a Middle Eastern and African person's religion that then is co-opted by white people and then given back to black people in a very different state, which is kind of like exactly what we talked about in the first place, brother.
Exactly. Yo, I appreciate your time, my dude.
Appreciate you, man.
Good luck with everything. First quarter, middle pass is coming out. I know y'all been waiting for a long time for it, so make sure y'all stay tuned for that. And if Immortal Technique is coming to a city near you, make sure that you are there. I'm sure Atlanta is going to be crazy tonight for sure. We appreciate y'all listening, appreciate y'all watching. See you next week with another dope show. Peace.